Hey kings and queens, hope you're doing well and welcome to my channel. So I'm Rachel from Intentional Adulting and I make videos for millennials all about the topics that we kind of like are interested in as we're growing up and maturing into sensible young adults. So property related chats, career advice, money, financial literacy, etc, etc. So if any of those interest you, definitely subscribe to the channel. Now I wanted to do another property related video for you today because a lot of you know that I've recently moved out my parents' home, thank the Lord Jesus Christ. And I've moved out of London. So my husband and I, we have moved to Kent, to the Garden of England, and it definitely is a massive change from the city life. And I've been getting the question about, or getting the question of, how is it living in Kent, especially like as a black person. So I wanted to share with you my experience of living in Kent, bearing in mind we only moved here in March, so it's been April, May, June, July, August, nearly 5 months. So I mean, there are hundreds if not thousands of black people who have lived in Kent longer than I have, who probably have way more to share than I have, but I do feel that I can share just a few deets on some of the things that I've observed and experienced being a newbie in Kent. And also actually I remember that Jade Van Riel did a similar video potentially a couple years ago about her experience of moving to Essex, because she bought her flat in Essex and she was born and bred in London as well, and it was quite interesting to see or to hear her experiences of moving out of the city and what it's like for her and etc, etc. So let me speak about Kent life and the experience. And just for your awareness, so I have moved, I won't say exactly where we live, but it's near the Medway river. It's near the Medway River. And that's important for one of the points I'm gonna mention. So I mean, just to start off, so obviously Kent is very different to London. Kent in itself is a massive, I guess is Kent a county? I'm not too sure what it exactly is, but Kent is massive. So your experience of living in Kent can be very varied. It will depend on where exactly in Kent you're moving to. If you're moving to the outskirts of London, Greater London, it may not feel that much different to living in the city. So I've got friends who live in Dartford, Greenhive, Everley, those areas are closer in to London and it's very multicultural. It's very easy to get into the city, both like car and train wise. There's lots of ethnic diversity, so you probably won't even feel that much of a difference living in those parts of Kent. I, on the other hand, I've moved into what I've heard people call deep Kent. So this is proper Kent. It takes me more than an hour to get into London. So this is Kent. There's like countrysides and fields like nearby. So of course it's very, very different, but that's why we moved here in the first place, because my partner and I, my husband, we're married, so I need to remember to call him my husband, but yeah, we were in our 30s, we're not getting any younger. We were looking, essentially we were looking for a quiet life, peaceful life, and we both were born and bred in London. Literally, I grew up in the heart of London, like Shoreditch. Busy, no matter what time of the day it is. Just busy, loud, very fast paced. And I had, spent a few years renting in like Enfield. I had spent a few years renting in East London as well, but I spent most of my years in North London, in the city where the hustle and bustle was. So I was very much, I was over living in London. I wanted to get out. it wasn't even the price that even if we could afford like a nice decent sized house in London, we still would have moved to Kent or moved outside of London, because we just had enough. And actually we just didn't foresee ourselves bringing up our children in London for various reasons. So, you know, those were just a couple of the reasons why we decided to move out. We did consider Essex as well, but we didn't see, we felt like we could get more for our money by moving to areas in Kent. So yeah, so we've been here since March, so it's been about 5 months, and of course it is different here. Like you can't move here expecting it to be like London. If you move here with the mindset of I hope it's like London, you're going to be disappointed, because it isn't. And hopefully you're considering moving to Kent because you want a different style of life. We definitely wanted less noise, so we very rarely hear sirens here, whereas back in London you would always hear at least one siren in every video I made. You know, it's much quieter here, much more slow paced. We live in the suburbs as well, so it's not even in the town centre in Kent, it's like outside the main town centre. Yeah, shops close early here, so unlike living in Shoreditch, South London, etc., if you want to get something from a local shop, you better get your ass out, get your bum out in the afternoon or early morning, because come 5, 6, the shops are going to be closed. It's just different, but that's why I like living here, because I wanted that differentness. Yeah, and to me it's a beautiful factor of living in Kent, the fact that everything is slower, so I feel less rushed and less chaotic, which is really nice, especially as you grow older. It's nice to not feel as rushed all the time. And I mean, there are parts of Kent that are similar to London, so if you still want to be around tons of people, you can just drive down to one of those places in Kent and get that kind of London vibe. So it's got that diversity, which is quite nice. Speaking of diversity, the ethnic diversity will vary depending on where exactly you move to in Kent. I'm guessing the further out you move, the closer to the coast you use, or like, you know, I'm guessing like Ashford, Canterbury, like those parts of Kent are potentially, or not potentially, they are less ethnically diverse than the parts of Kent that are closer to London. Again, you should go there with your eyes wide open, expecting there to be a bit of a difference. And actually where we live is surprisingly quite mixed. It's not, when you look at the statistics online, because there are websites where you can check like the makeup of the area that you live in, like the kind of jobs people have, their ethnic background, all those kind of like stats. It's not mixed at all when you look at the stats, but where we've moved to, I've seen way more black people than I ever envisioned. Haven't seen Asian people at all, which is, I don't know what the reason is, or yeah, it's kind of like white or black here, but there's more diversity than I expected, and that makes me feel I don't feel out of place, which is nice. You never really want to buy a house in an area where you feel out of place if you have a choice, you know. So that's nice, the fact that it's you know, it's slightly more mixed than I anticipated. And I mean, one downside of living in Kent is the fact that it's not as easy to, it's not as, you know, your ethnic food stuff, hair stuff, etc., they're not as easy to access as, you know, if you're living in Hackney or South London, etc. You've got to, well, it depends where you live in Kent again, but I've got to like do a proper drive and, you know, plan to go and get like yams and plantains and hair stuff from the nearest place where it's got a lot more black people living there. So it really depends. Like, I personally like having to travel a bit of a way to go and be surrounded by more ethnically diverse people, should I say. I like just living in an area which is different to what I'm used to. But yeah, it is a bit, not annoying, but it's a bit inconvenient sometimes if you don't live literally in those parts of Kent where there are lots of black people, etc., where you can easily access your ethnic African Caribbean foods. You've just really got to plan ahead, like plan a Saturday where you're going to go in and buy your stuff. Or, you know, if you happen to still work in London, use every and any opportunity that you're going into London to also grab yourself your ethnic foods, hair stuff, etc., because yeah, you just don't know when you may be able to access that stuff next. So yeah, I mean, we don't have local shops here that sell yams, that sell okra, that sell all those kind of things that you're used to easily getting in your local corner shop in London, most London boroughs. But it's just something, again, that you take on knowing what you're getting yourself into. And I think that there are many places like that in Essex as well, where you have to, like, you know, you may not be able to get that stuff very easily, and you know, you have to know where to get that stuff from. Not every shop will sell it, so it's not really a bummer, but it's just a bit of a change from being able to get that stuff so easily in London. Also bear in mind the fact that, you know, although house prices tend to be cheaper than London, like you get a lot more for your money in many areas of Kent compared to living in the city. Bear in mind that your train journey is going to cost an absolute fortune. So you know, you got to weigh up, like, does the cheaper house price, does that outweigh the amount of money you're going to be spending on your yearly travel ticket, for example? Weigh up, do all your calculations and stuff. And also it depends on your priorities. If you want a different kind of life and you're willing to travel an hour plus into London, then do it, so be it. I mean, the trains are very expensive, I can't lie, and we all know that train prices go up every year, which is a downside of living in Kent. And also, when you compare living in Kent to living in Essex, it's generally cheaper to get into London from Essex compared to getting into London from Kent, because when you look at the train stations that the Essex lines are connected to, they're typically connected to areas in East London, which are, generally speaking, cheaper parts of London compared to the train stations that are linked to the Kent network. So, you know, you're comparing areas like Ilford, Barking, Dagenham, you know, all those easily accessible areas from Kent. You know, compare that to having to go into Charing Cross and London Bridge and, you know, all of the train stations that you have to enter if you're coming in from Kent. So just the different entry points make your train journey a whole lot more expensive. I mean, I've tried to counteract that, I guess, by working from home as much as possible. So that's, I guess, the benefit of our new ways of working, the way society is going, the fact that a lot of us are not having to go into the office 4 or 5 days a week anymore. So hopefully, even though the train journeys are so expensive, hopefully because you're able to work from home, you'll be able to, like, I guess, not save a bit of money, but hopefully your overall costs are not that much more expensive than if you were not doing the Kent to London commute. So bear that in mind, that's a huge difference. I mean, overall, I do feel comfortable living here, and I'm starting to explore other parts of Kent as well, because, you know, as I said, Kent is so varied, just like London is so varied. Like, I'm not even going to go into it, but London is very different. Like, you'd walk across, you know, a few streets or go into a different borough and it's like a whole new city, basically. So just like London is really, really diverse, Kent is very diverse as well. So your experience, it will depend on where exactly in Kent you go. But for sure, do your research, visit the area that you're hoping to buy in as many times as possible before you put an offer on a house, before you complete, just to make sure that you're making like the right decision. Just look at the town, the local town centre. Like, who do you see walking about? Is it mostly old people? Is it a mixture of ethnic backgrounds? Just watch out for that stuff, and walk around the specific neighbourhood you're looking at, as you're considering as well, and just try and gauge or try and find out who lives there. Like, would you feel comfortable living there? That's really important for all of us. But overall, if you're considering moving to Kent from London, I personally would say do it. I mean, you get so much more for your money here compared to if you spent the same amount of money but on a property closer into London. There's so much choice, and there's, even if you're a lover of new builds, there's lots of new developments that are underway as well, which is promising. Also, there's lots of investment in quite a few areas of Kent as well, which is promising. You've got your high-speed train, so if you are not in a rush, but if you don't like spending a lot of time on trains, you have that option for you. And I just think I think it's a good experience personally. I would say do it. I think it's just nicer to bring up your family in, not in the city, basically. So that is my summary of my experience so far of living in Kent and why we chose Kent. And I would say go for it if you're a first time buyer. Of course, do as much research as you can. Keep researching. When we were looking for houses, and even during the whole process of buying this house, we were researching literally probably until the week before we completed on this house. We were always checking like the Kent news online, looking at the online newspapers, online websites, just researching what is happening, any crime or what's in the news, basically trying to look back at historical records and news of what's happened. We were just researching this, because when you're a buyer, when you're buying a home, especially if you're a first time buyer, you are just, not that you're scared, but you really want to make the right decision for yourself. So I totally get how you put your heart and soul into this, and you really want to make sure that you're making the right decision. So do as much research as you can. But yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to keep rattling on. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Let me know if you did by leaving a comment in the comment section. Let me know where you're considering buying, Essex, Kent, Milton Keynes, Surrey. If you've got the money for it, let me know. Also like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe for more property and adulting related content. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.